Good afternoon, everybody. It's been a historic day for Cuckfield and commemorating Gideon Mantell and his wonderful achievements. And I'd like to, I think it's a fitting end to today that we have brought along today the dinosaur expert in the country, Dr. Angela Milner, who's come all the way from the Natural History Museum in London. Please give her a very warm welcome. Thank you.
Elevated me a little bit, which I really am. But anyway, thank you very much for that warm welcome and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to be here on this most utterly appropriate of occasions, because as I'm sure you all know, or if you don't know, you're going to after you've heard me speaking this afternoon, why Cuckfield is such an important place in the world of dinosaurs. And it's doubly a pleasure for me to be here because we have the privilege of looking after Gideon Mantell's fossil collections in the Natural History Museum in London on behalf of you, everyone, the nation. So I wasn't quite sure what sort of talk to do this afternoon because I wasn't really sure what kind of audience I was going to get. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about Gideon Mantell, but this isn't really going to be a historical lecture. But I'm going to tell you a bit about Gideon Mantell and the dinosaurs that he first discovered, and really how we see him in today's world and the contribution he made to the world of dinosaurs. So I'm going to start off with not a very particularly interesting looking slide. This is just to give you some idea of the worldwide occurrence of dinosaurs. And you can see from those spots on the map, there's far more localities than are indicated there, but at least you can see that dinosaurs are worldwide. They've been found on every continent, including even Antarctica. Down here, there are several finds being made there in fairly recent years. But there's a nice, satisfying concentration of red dots all over, well, they're splotched all over Britain, but of course, largely they should be in southeast England. And why is that particularly? Well, I'm going to just go on to straight away. But just before that, dinosaurs, they're one particular group of animals that lived between about 230 million years ago and the last dinosaurs in the conventional use of that word, that is, not including birds, which are descended from one group of dinosaurs. The last dinosaurs died out about 65 million years ago. And I hope some of you, at least near the front, can just see this little diagram. All it's designed to do is give you some idea that as we go through time, from the earliest dinosaurs, which are all quite small ones, through time, through three geological periods, the Triassic, the Jurassic and the Cretaceous, dinosaurs became more diverse. They evolved into many different kinds and they adopted many different ways of life. Some of them were two-legged, some of them were four-legged, and say they were the dominant terrestrial animals for a huge period in the past history of the Earth. And we're going to really home in on this, just by this line here, which marks or past this line, which marks the Cretaceous period, which was the last period of the Mesozoic era in Earth's history. And we're really looking at what we call the early Cretaceous, around sort of 140 to 120 million years ago. And rocks of that age are right beneath where you're sitting now. And this just is a little geological sketch map of southeast England. And all I want you to notice is that where we are here, just a bit away from Burgess Hill, Cuckfield is situated just on the border between this area which has lines across and an area which is covered in dots on the map. And those areas of lines and dots, this whole arc outlined with a black outline there, is what we call the Wealden rocks, the Wealden series of rocks in southeast England which were laid down in the early Cretaceous. And that, of course, is why we find the dinosaurs that were living at that time in those rocks. And, of course, we only find them either in quarries where quarrying has gone down to the deeper layers below the surface of the ground, or we find them outcropping along the coast. And the only other exposures of lower Cretaceous rocks in southern England, or anywhere else, really in England for that matter, besides this wheeled basin in Sussex, is the other real area is on the Isle of Wight, which I'll be referring to a bit, because that's very much part of the Wealden story. But the Wealden story and the story of dinosaurs does begin very locally in this area, and I'm sure most of you will know where that is. That was Gideon Mantell's house in Lewes, Castle Place, and that's where he lived, and that's where he was a local country doctor in this area. And here he is, Gideon Mantell and his wife Mary Ann. Mantell was born in 1790, and he died in 1852. He married Mary Ann in 1816, and although his profession was that of a doctor, he was actually a shoemaker's son. Very much his consuming passion in life was actually natural history and geology of southeast England. And he made a huge contribution to the beginnings of geology in southeast England, not just dinosaurs that I'm going to be talking about today, but all over the Wealden and the chalk of southeast England. So he was really one of the first sort of descriptive geologists who really put the subject on the map in the early part of the 19th century. And Gideon Mantell was certainly collecting large bones by about 1817. And one of the areas where he concentrated on collecting was this quarry, which is probably where Whitman's Green is now. That's Cuckfield Parish Church, the spire there. And this is an engraving of the quarry when it was working. The quarry there, they're quarrying stone, Tilgate stone, which is part of the Wealden sequence. It's generally reckoned that this is actually Gideon Mantell in the corner here from the quarry. But fossil bones were being found while the workmen were excavating the rock for roadstone, for building, or whatever. And it was in quarries like this that some of the most important and earliest discoveries that were recognised to be dinosaurs were made. They were made by Gideon Mantell and by his wife as well, Mary Ann. And these are two fossilised teeth, each of them still on a block of Tilgate stone. These came almost certainly from that quarry. And those are teeth of a large herbivorous dinosaur, a plant-eating dinosaur called Iguanodon. There's rather apocryphal stories about these teeth. That they were collected by Mary Ann Mantell one day while she was out with Gideon while he was on his rounds visiting patients. And she was the one that spotted these teeth in a pile of roadstone beside a road. And there's been all sorts of rather apocryphal tales as to which of them actually found these teeth and where they were found. But it does seem, by going back into the literature and the notes, as people have done quite recently, that they were probably found in a pile of stone at the side, which has been stacked in that quarry. But it does seem to be the case that Mary Ann spotted these objects. And, of course, they were like nothing that had ever been found before. And Mantell puzzled over them. Of course, it was obvious that they were teeth, but of what? They were so large. Simply, I've got some cards of these teeth at the back to show you after the lecture. And so he puzzled greatly about these teeth for some while, and as was the practice then as it is today, he showed them to professional geologists, people like Lyell. And in fact, Lyell took one of these teeth to the leading expert of the day, who was Baron Cuvier in Paris, who was effectively the world's leading anatomist in those days. And he replied quite categorically that they were rhinoceros teeth. Well, here's a slightly larger selection of these teeth, which also come from that quarry and other areas and others around this area. And, well, Mantell was quite convinced they were not rhinoceros teeth, but he really wasn't sure for some while what they were. But he had an inkling that they had to belong to some kind of reptile because they were found in such old rocks. And he did have a bit of help with identifying what they were from a man called Samuel Stutchbury, who was actually an assistant in the Royal College of Surgeons. And he actually made the key observation to put Mantell onto the right lines as to what these teeth could be. And Samuel Stutchbury, reckoned that the most similar thing he'd ever seen was the teeth of a lizard called an iguana. There's an iguana, a nice smiling, happy iguana. And indeed, iguanas, which as they are a particular family of lizards, they're obviously still around today, the teeth of these huge teeth did look quite similar to the teeth of an iguana. I'm sure you can't see the detail there, unfortunately. But of course, they were on a monumentally huge scale compared to an iguana. So that led Mantell to the realization that these teeth actually belonged to giant extinct reptiles of some kind that had lived in the remote past. So he really was the first person to make that connection and to realize that in these rocks 120, 130 million years ago, giant extinct reptiles of some kind, though he thought at the time lizards, had lived in the past. Now, of course, fossils have been coming out of rocks ever since they were laid down, fossilized and been eroded. And the first description of dinosaurs actually predates Mantell by about 2,000 years, because they were described in ancient Chinese literature about 2,000 years ago as dragon bones and dragon teeth. These were ones obviously that were found in China. But nobody had a clue what they were beyond dragon teeth. So Mantell holds that very important place in the history of natural history and paleontology. He was the first person who really realised that giant things lived in the past, the like of which no one had any inkling of before his discoveries. So what did he make of this animal? Well, he wasn't too sure, but he thought it must be some kind of giant lizard, anything up to 100 feet long, scaling up the teeth from an iguana. So moving on to the story, one of the other very early things that was discovered, and this one definitely is attributed to Ann Mantell. She found this in a quarry near Crawley. And what is this strange-looking object? Well, the experts of the day thought it must be some kind of horn. Some iguana lizards have horns, so maybe it was a nose horn of an iguana lizard. Some other experts of the day thought it was a horn. And what sort of animals do we know that have horns? Rhinoceroses. So we were back to the rhinos again. So there was some discussion about what this could be as well. But then some further clues came out, unfortunately not too local to here, but actually from Kent. Because here in Benstead's quarry, in Kentish Ragstone, which again is wheeled in an age, was discovered the first partial skeleton of a dinosaur, Iguanodon. Mantell, named Iguanodon on the basis of the teeth. He named it in 1825. So the name was established right back as early as that time. And he was able to make the connection between those loose teeth and this accumulation of bones, so it's found in Kent, because there were one or two teeth associated with this bundle of bones. So it was clearly the same animal. As I said, this was the first partially articulated skeleton that enabled him to make sort of some more sense of what this animal might have looked like. And when Ben said, the quarry owner, had exchanged specimens and discussions with Mantell, alerted Mantell to this find. Mantell was desperate to add it to his big collection of fossils, but he couldn't afford it because Benson wanted £25 for it. Mantell's friends clubbed together and they bought it for him. And so on the basis of this specimen, which again is now on permanent display in the Natural History Museum, Mantell was actually able to produce this drawing. And this is the first ever reconstruction of what a dinosaur might have been like. This is a little pen and ink drawing in Mantell's own hand. And here is his lizard, got a little horn on its nose there, as you can see. And it's based on the bones that were actually found in the Maidstone slab. So by this time we've got some backbones, got some legs, a few bits of ribs. So he was getting the idea that this was a giant, four-footed, lizard-like animal, and as I said, he was under the impression something perhaps up to 100 feet long. So it must have been standing on a very big log, mustn't it? What he actually had was indeed part of a few bones belonging to an Iguanodon skeleton. And I'm going to come back to this in a little while, but charted against the modern idea of a reconstruction of Iguanodon skeleton and the body outline, that's how much was actually present in the what we all refer to it lovingly as the mantelpiece. So that was really enabled the first reconstruction of a dinosaur to be made. And I'm going to digress very slightly here for a moment just to backtrack, because although Mantell named Iguanodon in 1825, unfortunately it wasn't the very first dinosaur to be named. He was pipped to the post by 1 year by Dean William Buckland in Oxford, who named a meat-eating dinosaur called Megalosaurus on the basis of those fragments of jaws and teeth. So sadly he didn't quite make it as naming the very first dinosaur, but Iguanodon was the first plant-eating dinosaur to be named, and the second one ever in the history of the subject. But Buckland was very important. He and Mantell obviously used to correspond with each other, and it was the finding of the big bones of a meat-eating animal, which was sort of called Megalosaurus, also enabled Mantell to realise that some of the things that he collected, odd bones, almost certainly belonged to a meat-eating dinosaur, but of course he wasn't able to name them. And another very important person in the early history of dinosaurs is Richard Owen, who was at the Royal College of Surgeons as a young man, who later became the first director of the Natural History Museum. He was the person who actually coined the name Dinosauria. It first uttered from his lips in 1841. Dinosauria means terrible lizards, and the name was actually published in 1842. So, on the basis of Buckland's work and Mantell's work and his own work, Richard Owen was the first person to realise that this was a totally separate group of prehistoric animals that actually stood upright rather like we do, and certainly weren't like lizards. And so he actually coined the name Dinosaurs, which is still with us today. And under his direction, that's Richard Owen's direction, were made the first flesh models of what dinosaurs were thought to be like. On the left, here we have Iguanodon. It's now portrayed as a big, heavy, four-footed animal, still with the horn on its nose here. So it's a very upright, large, sort of rather mammal-like kind of reptile. And on its right there, these are the prototype models for the full-size ones that are in the Crystal Palace, and you can still see them in the grounds there. On the left is the meat-eating dinosaur, Megalosaurus. So there we are. These were made for the Crystal Palace exhibition in 1854. So we've got an idea of what people's eyes thought dinosaurs looked like in those days. And as again, I'm sure you know, when the Crystal Palace models were being constructed, the full-size one, it is said that a dinner party took place inside the Iguanodon. But sadly, of course, although Mantell's name is on the right there of the cartoon, he wasn't able to be a guest at that dinner because this took place about a couple of years after he died. So, but Mantell's early work and then some further thoughts by Owen led us to think dinosaurs were big, lumbering, gigantic, four-footed beasts. And it wasn't until considerably after that that we began to get a very different idea of what a big plant-eating dinosaur really might be like. And that was when complete skeletons were finally found in quarries in Belgium, in coal mines, in fact, in quarries in the 1870s. And that led to some reconstructions of a completely different kind of animal because the whole skeletons were actually found more or less articulated in the ground. So from about 1880 onwards, Iguanodon reared up onto its hind legs and looked like that. And because a complete skeleton had been found, it was realised that this mystery bone that we looked at earlier, that Ann Mantell found the first example of, wasn't actually a horn of any kind. It actually goes there. It's the thumb joint on the Iguanodon. And why did Iguanodon change from being a four-footed animal to sitting up like a kangaroo? Yes, because at the time, of course, the only large animal with short front legs and long back legs and a long tail that was known to compare dinosaurs with was a kangaroo. So it was given a kangaroo-like pose by Dollo, a Belgian paleontologist who did a lot of the work. And there was in the old Dinosaur Gallery at the Natural History Museum is a complete skeleton of Iguanodon, which was mounted as in the still then understood pose, looking like a kangaroo, would actually, in fact, would have broken its tail completely to be sitting up like that. And thanks to some modern studies of Iguanodon by my close colleague, contemporary and friend Dave Norman, who works at Cambridge University. He did his PhD on Iguanodon. Iguanodon's come back down onto all fours, but in a very, very different kind of pose. And it's really quite a dynamic-looking animal that could actually move on all fours. Or indeed, it could lift the front end off the ground because the heavy front end was balanced by the enormously thick, heavy, stiff tail, not a bent tail. And it could walk along on all twos or all fours. So I'm sure Mantell would have been amazed to see that, but he didn't have he didn't have any comparative material. There were no other dinosaurs for him to go on when he first started his work, so he made an incredibly good attempt at gauging what kind of animals they really were. So there we have Iguanodon. And Iguanodon is known not only from right here in and around Cuckfield, it's known from several other places around the Wealden, Sussex, it's known from the Isle of Wight, it's known from Western North America, it's known from Asia. And so Iguanodon is a very key animal also to enabling us to link past populations and past continents together. Gosh, I wish Gideon Mantell had known how important that find of his was. And we know, I say, Iguanodon, what Gideon Mantell didn't realise was anything about how Iguanodon actually lived, and we have a lot more knowledge of that now, partly from things like, as well as the animals themselves, from things like footprints and trackways. Here's actually a huge Iguanodon footprint actually found in Wealden on the Isle of Wight. There's another one, positive cast of a footprint, which shows you how big these things got. And there are also lots of footprints and trackways from Fairlight near Hastings, which actually tell us that several different kinds of dinosaurs were living in the Wealden area, in this area, 120 to 130 million years ago. They've all got different kinds of toe patterns and prints, and so they give us quite a big clue both to the kinds of animals that were around, and indeed the fact that often they were moving in groups or family groups or herds, moving along together. And so there's Iguanodon actually using not its horn and its thumb spike, but yes, it's probably still for defense, for attack. And there it is, jabbing that spike very efficiently into a large predator who's trying to have a go at it. And I'm very pleased to acknowledge that these beautiful illustrations that I'm using here are John Sibbitt's artwork. John's, I think, our leading dinosaur artist. Somewhere? He's here today. So having moved on from Iguanodon, we seem to have got back to meat-eating dinosaurs. And as I said at the beginning, there were certainly traces of meat-eating dinosaurs known from around here. Mantell certainly had some bones of those. But the ones that were first described were actually earlier ones from Oxfordshire. But there was certainly a large meat-eating dinosaur living in this dinosaur fauna in the early Cretaceous in England. Because we have some teeth, which are clearly meat-eating dinosaur teeth. There's the kind of animals they were, and we can strip them down to their skeleton. Big, large-headed animals, mouths full of compressed, steak knife-edged teeth, and short, grasping arms. But we haven't got really good remains of meat-eating dinosaurs, even now, from southeast England on the whole. We've got some tempting things like that. And those are just 3 bones from the back, from about the middle of the back. They're also from Sussex. They're a little bit later. They were found rather after Mantell's time. But that clearly belongs to a meat-eating dinosaur. There isn't any more of it than that. It just consists of those 3 very large backbones. Moving on from our meat eater then, so we know they were here because we have got some bones and teeth and some footprints. Here's a meat eater attacking a very large plant eater, much larger than Iguanodon, a big 4-footed thing called a sauropod. And sure enough, they were here too, in the Wealden. There are certainly members of this kind of group. They're called Diplodocus. I have one of those in the Natural History Museum in the main hall. There are diagnostic bones of those known from the Wealden, but what Gideon Mantell found was some very, very large bones which probably belong to a different group of large 4-footed herbivores. These called Brachiosaurs. And Mantell named, on the basis of some very large fragments of limb bones, an animal which he called Pelorosaurus, and that is certainly belongs to one of these huge plant-eating animals. And again, there are better remains of those have now been found on the Isle of Wight, and there have been backbones as well found. So we know these kinds of animals were also living around in the Wealden in the early Cretaceous times, right here in England. These things are also known from Africa and North America. And the really big ones look like that. I'm sure that the Brachiosaurs that come from England, say they're all still rather fragmentary. They probably have the same skeleton pattern as that, but probably not as big as that huge animal from Africa that lives in the museum in Berlin. One of Gideon Mantell's other important finds, another dinosaur that he named, was a member of a group which we call armoured dinosaurs. And he named an animal called Hylaeosaurus on the basis of one block of bones which contained some very sharp spines. And there's a reconstruction of what Hylaeosaurus might have been like. And I do emphasise the might have been like, because a block of bones which Gideon Mantell named in 1833, it is in the museum in London. The block of bones is still in the rock, and for all kinds of reasons it's never been researched very thoroughly, and so we're not really sure, beyond the fact that it belongs to this group of armoured dinosaurs, plant eaters, and it was an animal maybe about 4 or 5 metres long, but it certainly had protected spines along the body. We're not really sure whether or not it's the same as this animal in front of it here, which is another one from the Wealden, called Polycanthus, which is known both from around here, from Rugeley, and from the Isle of Wight. And it may be that they belong to one and the same species, but no one's done the research even now to find out whether that's true or not. But nonetheless, the first armoured dinosaur name rests with one of Gideon Mantell's descriptions. And these, just to give you some idea what they were like from a few more drawings, these armoured dinosaurs were quite big, bulky animals, relied on being armoured rather than running away from any potential predators, and footprints rather similar to these kinds of footmarks have again been found on the Sussex coast, and so there's an indication that animals like this were certainly around and part of that fauna. It's another dinosaur that we credited to Mantell. This is only a very small fragment of a jaw. Those grooves at the top were where the teeth were situated. They're missing and fallen out. That often happens when things fossilise. Their teeth drop out before they actually turn to stone. And this was an animal that Mantell belonged to as part of his collection, say we now have in the Natural History Museum. And this is one that he called Iguanodon. That's probably a name that you're not familiar with. It's based only on that little piece of jaw. And first of all, Mantell thought it was actually part of it might have been part of an Iguanodon jaw, but not quite the same, so he gave it a different name. And more recently, it's been thought that it might belong to Hyleosaurus, but it clearly doesn't belong to an armoured dinosaur. And what it probably is, that little jaw, is a very small relic of another group of plant-eating animals called stegosaurs. Now there's a full skeleton of a stegosaur, and this the restudy of that little bit of jaw was only done 5 years ago, and so that actually now is the very earliest description of one of these floated dinosaurs called a stegosaur. And there's something else quite amazing that Gideon Mantell discovered, but because there wasn't any comparative material available to him then, he really had no idea that he could also describe the very first stegosaur. Yet one more little animal from that lived in the Wealden times is the one on the front of this picture, called Hypsilophodon, which is a little fast-running plant-eater, bipedal one, which the best material comes from the Isle of Wight in this animal. But yet again, Gideon Mantell records in one of his papers and books, he describes some small bones from the back of one of these animals, and he thought they belonged to a juvenile iguanodon, a baby iguanodon, because they do look very similar. And so he missed the opportunity of naming yet another dinosaur, but he was certainly aware of its existence, and this is this one called Hypsilophodon. So yet one more dinosaur which certainly Gideon Mantell was aware, but not perhaps aware of the range of differences between them, today. And there's a little skeleton of Hypsilophodon, which gives you an idea of what that one's like. The whole animal is only about 1 metre long. That's probably a juvenile one. But we haven't finished yet. I'm painting a picture of lots of different kinds of dinosaurs living together in the Wealden in southeast England. As I say, up to now, Mantell had some kind of handle on all of that. But more modern studies of, again, unfortunately, very fragmentary bones which we have in the collections in London have now revealed the fact that there were small meat-eating dinosaurs living as part of this fauna, as well as the really big ones. Just based again on fragmentary remains, there might have been one something like this. This is actually called Truodont. It was probably I use the word in quotes, one of the most intelligent dinosaurs, only because the brain size was actually, in proportion to its body size, was larger than most other dinosaurs. And it appears to have been, had binocular vision. It was probably quite a, in quotation marks, intelligent, small, predatory dinosaur. And there's a skeleton of one of those chasing something else. So this isn't from an American find, but there are just odd bones, particularly the hip bones. Part of the hip bones appears to be something else similar to that living in southeast England in the Wealden. And possibly even remains of animals a bit like this too. Those are, that's the raptor from Jurassic Park. For those of you that saw the film, here's a happy family scene of a pack of these intelligent small meat-eaters attacking a large plant eater. This scene is actually painted about 110 million years ago in North America, but it's still part of the early Cretaceous. And just from fragmentary bits and pieces that we have to stitch the picture together, you could probably almost transfer a very similar scene to that one to southeast England in Wealden times. And I can't possibly give a lecture about Wealden dinosaurs without mentioning the most recent recruit to the fauna, but even this one actually does have a connection with Gideon Mantell. This is Baryonyx walkeri, which I have well, I suppose every paleontologist's dream to be in on the discovery of a new dinosaur and to be able to do all the research on it was a really exciting time in my life. This one was discovered in a quarry, Smokejack's Pit near Ockley in Surrey in 1983. And it proved to belong to a completely new kind of group of meat-eating dinosaurs that actually look rather more like crocodiles at the front end. Really peculiar, long snout, huge claws on the hands, and may well have been a fish eater. And only one individual of Baryonyx had been found. Even in Mantell's time, because he and other people collected so regularly from the rocks in the Wealden, they had a really good picture of the kind of animal remains that were to be found. But nothing of this turned up until 1983. Or did it? And there, again, just to show you a skeleton, there's a picture of a skeleton, half a skeleton anyway, of Baryonyx, so it's the most recently discovered Wealden dinosaur, almost, in the Natural History Museum. Baryonyx hasn't got normal kind of dinosaur teeth that you'd expect a meat-eater to have. They normally have very flat, blade-like teeth with serrations on them. The teeth of Baryonyx are much more crocodile-like. They're very long-rooted, but the crown, that's that brown part at the top there, they're actually very rounded. The enamel on the teeth, the outside surface on the tooth, is really peculiar. It's got a kind of grainy pattern. And the serrations on the teeth are very, very tiny. So the grainy pattern you can see on that top left, top right picture there, if you put it under a scanning electron microscope. And after the work on Baryonyx was finished, I thought I really ought to look through some of the odds and ends, the loose teeth, from the Wealden and from the Mantell collection, which we have in the museum. And sure enough, yet another animal that Mantell was very familiar with there were crocodile remains from the Wealden too, contemporary with the dinosaurs. The main Wealden crocodile, which Mantell calls it the Tilgate crocodile, or the Tilgate forest crocodile, there was an animal called Supersaurus. And when I had a look at some of the teeth, the loose teeth that had been identified as belonging to this crocodile, a few of them actually belonged to Baryonyx. So, again, it would have been impossible for anybody in Mantell's time to know that, because we just didn't have the amount of fossils and the comparative data available that we have nowadays. But I really like that connection, that even actually Mantell had actually found some Baryonyx teeth back in the the 1820s, if only he'd known it. So I've been giving you a quick cook's tour of the kind of animals that were living, say, in the Wealden times, in this area. And just to show you one brief picture of what it was really like then, based on some work done by Percy Allen, Professor of Geology at Reading University, and just concentrating really on the bottom picture here. At the time when most of these animals were living in this area, there were hills to the north, in the sort of London area, quite high ground there. And this part of southeast England was actually really, it was a low-lying deltaic floodplain, fresh water, with some brackish incursions, and all the rivers were draining down towards France. So the dinosaurs that Mantell found, and everyone else has found since, were living, or most of them, probably that was the area in which they were living, because we found their footprints walking along the beaches. We found their bones and their skeletons, and they were living in this low-lying deltaic floodplain area. Probably, at least the Iguanodons, because they lived in large family groups, perhaps feeding on the abundant horsetails and fern remains that are also found as fossils in the Wealden rocks. So it was a bit different to life today, but it's all still there underneath us. So just to come full circle, to finish where I started, you really can't underestimate how important Mantell's contribution was to the beginnings of the study of dinosaurs. Because as I said, he was the first person to really realise such things had lived in the past. Obviously someone else would have come along and done that if he hadn't. And the other early person who named a dinosaur, Dean William Buckland, he was quite convinced when his dinosaur was first named that it actually belonged to some kind of mammal, some kind of extinct whale or something. So you can't credit him with the insight that Gideon Mantell had. So it's high time and well overdue that he now has his proper monument to his achievements right here in Cuckfield. Thank you.
I'd like to thank very much Dr. Milner for coming here today, and I'm sure if there's any questions, she'd be happy to answer them.
Yes, and I brought one or two specimens from the museum on the table at the back, which I'll gladly stand and talk about if anybody's interested to have a look at them. And perhaps I could also plug a book, which I'm not plugging this for any other reason than just to recommend it for anybody who really wants to delve into the history of Gideon Mantell and the beginnings of dinosaurs. I can really recommend this book. It was published last year, and it's called Gideon Mantell and the Discovery of Dinosaurs. It was by actually a retired American professor, Dennis Dean. It's published by Cambridge University Press. So if anybody's really keen on following the whole history up, here it is in this book.
I've got two questions for the Professor. First of all, what's your favourite theory for how they died out?
Sorry, I've got two questions at once.
Oh, sorry.
Can I answer? This lady at the front was asking.
Ladies first.
Yeah, they all seem to have had huge, thick tails. Yes, they did. The tails were actually held rigid when they were alive, because they connected by ossified tendons, in Iguanodon anyway. And yes, the heavy tail actually balanced the front end of the body around the hips, so that the body was actually held quite horizontal to the ground, and that's what enabled them to move very easily on either forelegs or two. And
ossified bone, not tendons.
Ossified tendons.
Really?
Some of them have ossified tendons. Crisscross pattern running along the back. Yeah. Would actually kept the whole thing of the spine. What was that question?
Well, there was two really. The first one was, what's your favourite theory for what happened 65 million years ago when they all disappeared?
Well, if you've got another hour. In a nutshell, dinosaurs they didn't all die out suddenly 65 million years ago. There was a decline in dinosaur diversity over about 8 million years, leading up to from about subtract 65 from about 74 to 76 million years ago. There was a steady decline in the number of different kinds of dinosaurs that are found. There's only one place in the world where there's a continuous record of rocks that were laid down in terrestrial sediments, and that's in Western North America, near the Canadian-American boundary. So that's the only place in the world where we've got a continuous story of what's happening. And in that area, it does seem to be that the numbers of different kinds declined slowly, and then there was a rather more sudden decrease in the numbers of kinds found as we get towards 65 million years ago. But it's also the case that the last recorded dinosaur bone is actually a long way below the geological boundary. So whether the meteorite impact, there was a meteorite impact which happened in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, there's enough good evidence to know now that one really did happen, and it's dated to almost exactly that time, 65 million years ago. So there was a huge meteorite impact. There was also an enormous outbreak of volcanic activity in where India is today. That went on in 3 phases for about 1 million years. So there were other things happening at around that time. The long, slow decline in dinosaur diversity does appear to be related to climate becoming more seasonal and changes in sea levels in North America. And a lot of people now think that the combination of other events that happened towards the end of the Cretaceous period may have accelerated the final decline of the dinosaurs. But whether they were directly responsible for it or not is, I think, is a rather more open question. Because whatever killed the dinosaurs didn't kill most of the other groups of animals that were living around at the same time, because they're all still with us today. And some of those groups of animals that survived whatever did for the dinosaurs are quite environmentally sensitive, things like frogs and salamanders. So some of the horrendous stories that geophysicists like to tell us, that there was acid rain and there were global wildfires, that just does not square with what we actually find in the fossil record. So it had to be something that was a bit more selective. And it's only large-bodied land animals that seem to have died out. So what I'm saying is, I suppose, it's a combination of number of changing climatic conditions that seem to have been the cause. But certainly some change in climate, perhaps in temperatures, may have had something to do with it. But it may even have been more secondary effects of poisonous elements from volcanic dust, or poisonous elements maybe from the meteorite impact. It's not a clear-cut, easy thing to, even now, to give an answer.
I did have a second question, if you don't mind. I read in the paper just a few weeks ago that in America now, a lot of people of your ilk, professors of paleontology and similar things, are getting attacked publicly by the religious fundamentalists who think that evolution is a load of hooey. Have you experienced that type of discrimination, for want of a better word?
There is a very vociferous lobby at work in the USA. There's much less of it anywhere else in the world, I'm pleased to say.
How does their attacks square with the evidence? I mean, they seem to ignore.
They don't square with the evidence.
That's a good enough answer.
I mean, modern science has got to the stage where we can accurately date rocks, unequivocally date rocks, and we know that the earliest rocks, at least the Earth is about 4,600 million years old. The earliest organisms seem to go back about 3,800 million years old. And modern techniques tell us quite categorically that we can accurately gauge what animals are living when through time, and you can demonstrate evolution in action by looking at some simple animals today, things that have short life cycles like bacteria and so on. You can actually demonstrate that evolution is happening.
Was man around at the time of dinosaurs?
Was man?
Man.
Certainly not. Only in Hollywood. Only Hollywood. No, definitely not. The earliest members of the family that which we belong to, Hominidae, go back about a little more than 4 million years now. But our own species, Homo sapiens, is about the earliest records now about 400,000 years. So there's a gap of 61 million years between us and them. Except the learns, of course.
Thank you.
Have you got comparisons of dinosaurs of the same species in the same period of time where it gives an indication of the benefits of certain types of soil and food that they were eating showing up in the bones, so that some are getting heavier and they're better animals than in other areas?
No. Not in the way that you mean, I don't think. Well, for instance, Iguanodon, the one animal I've been talking about, that's known from this part of the world, it's known from parts of North America, it's known from Asia. The species of Iguanodon that you find in all of these parts of the world, more or less the same time, they're all about the same size.
All the same weights?
Probably, yes. Yeah.
Dr. Milner, you mentioned the recent discovery of baryonyx quite close to here. Do I assume that there's still active digging going on in the Weald?
There's lots of people looking, there's a lot of amateur collectors looking very frequently in many wielded locations. Yes, including the pit where that came from.
So if we want to dig a hole in our garden, how deep should we dig?
Anywhere?
In the village.
Oh, I'm sure somebody's got somewhat more local knowledge than me to tell you that. How deep down? Somebody's going to volunteer?
Well, in South Street, about 2 or 3 feet. Seriously. Dinosaur vertebrae we found in South Street.
Well, I think you need to dig down 30 or 40 feet at least.
Plenty of wells there, village.
Well, a well only, I mean, the chance of it being sunk and actually hitting with a dinosaur bone would be small. It isn't such a small surface area. It does happen, but...
You said, Dr. Milner, that the climatic changes were one of the reasons of disappearing.
I believe that's probably the case.
With the climatic change, must have been a change in growing of their food supply, was it? So
Well, that may...
starving them.
Not necessarily. What happened at the end of the Cretaceous period, because of continental drift, the continents were splitting apart, that changed ocean circulation patterns, and there was changes in sea level. So what happened was that the climate does seem to have started to become more seasonal in the world, much more like it is now. For large stretches of time before that, it was fairly equable all over the world. There were no ice caps on the poles. So in the late Cretaceous times, about 70 million years ago, we have records of dinosaurs living at both poles because it was warm enough for vegetation to grow. They obviously lived there, perhaps not year round, but certainly at some times of the year. That doesn't seem to be necessarily the cause, because one of the other ones that's commonly cited for dinosaurs becoming extinct was when the rise of flowering plants, which happened at the beginning of the Cretaceous period, the plants that are now dominant all around us today. Some people have argued that the change to those different kinds of plants may have actually led to the dinosaurs becoming extinct. But actually it's quite the reverse, because that coincides with a huge increase in one particular group of plant eaters. They seem to have flourished alongside the rise of flowering plants. So no, it doesn't seem to be any lack of plant materials. There are plenty of fossil evidence for plants right through that time. But there does seem to be, there was an extinction of some kinds of plants that happened around that time as well. There isn't an easy answer to it all. But they didn't all just roll over and die when the Bible hit, which is not that simple.
In the paper earlier this week, there was a report that a dinosaur had been discovered which predates Tyrannosaurus rex, and there might be a change in name. Now, if it is correct that it was previously described under a previous name, according to the scientific rules, the name should change. In this particular case, would you favour this or not?
No, I wouldn't. And unfortunately, because the new scientific names of all organisms are actually we actually have to stick to a set of rules and regulations, a bit like law. It's called the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature. And we're all supposed to stick to the rules so that all around the world, when we name something, everybody else knows what it is and how to identify it. But fortunately, the rules have just changed. And if a name has been in use continuously for a large number of years, as the name Tyrannosaurus has, then you can conserve it.
Good.
So we can carry on this one.
You say Gideon Mantell estimated his iguanodon was about 100 foot long. How accurate was he? How long was it?
Oh, well out. Factor 2, I think. The biggest iguanodon species that comes from Belgium, they get up, more than factor 2, they're about 10 metres long.
Do you find in some species you get any malformations of bones from different conditions they're living in?
You certainly find dinosaurs suffering from arthritis. They have arthritic bones, just like we do. You certainly get examples of healed fractures. So they certainly broke their bones and they're healed while they're still alive. And there are very rare examples of dinosaurs with bone tumours.
The other thing you said, I couldn't tell you it was soft, not really soft as it,
But it can be
very
calcified.
hard soft
It can be calcified.
It can feel calcified.
Yeah.
Can you comment on the evolution of birds from dinosaurs? There have been so much conflicting evidence recently that perhaps they did evolve.
Well, I'm very firmly in the birds are descended from small meat-eating dinosaurs camp. I think there is overwhelming evidence to support that. There are so many similarities in the skeletons between one particular group of small meat-eaters through the earliest recognised bird, Archaeopteryx, and through onto more modern birds. I think there's an overwhelmingly good case for that to be the case. And of course, now that we've found recently in China, there have been lots of little meat-eating dinosaurs with various kinds of development, feather-like developments. Although they're too late in time to be directly ancestral to birds, I think they are all part and parcel of the same story. So something that appeared this week in the papers, that birds have come from some little gliding reptile, I don't accept it at all.
There's been some discussion that there were some warm-blooded dinosaurs. Is there any sort of reasonable thought about that? We know quite a lot about dinosaur physiology from looking at sections across bones, looking at them microscopically. What seems to be clear is that dinosaurs have a huge range of physiologies, right through from something that was quite crocodile-like, which you call cold-blooded, through to particularly the small meat-eaters, which seem to approach much more closely the kind of
physiology that we have and birds have. And it certainly seems that most, the big dinosaurs anyway, had a kind of physiology which we just don't see in any modern animal. They grew very fast when they were young, for pretty obvious reasons. You can tell that kind of bone tissues flying. And then when they got to a certain size, they literally seem to have switched physiology. They actually effectively turned the thermostat down and grew much more slowly because they were big enough to maintain a pretty constant body temperature through purely physical relationship between size and volume. So they were, to use the technical word, a lot of big dinosaurs appear to be mass homeotherms. And there's no other animal that does that today. So elephants ought to, because they're really too big to be warm-blooded. Spend their life trying to lose heat.
Did mammals overlap with dinosaurs?
Absolutely. The earliest mammals go back to about the time the first dinosaurs appeared. Mammals right throughout the whole of the Mesozoic era. The earliest mammals are about 200 million years old, but they were all small nocturnal animals, nothing bigger than the size of a rat or a cat. And the dinosaurs were so successful and were the dominant land animals. The only niche left with mammals, it seems, were small burrowers and probably nocturnal things. So they were there scurrying around all the time, just waiting for an opportunity.
So the mammals survive whatever...
Yes. Otherwise we wouldn't be here.
But I wonder if that has anything to do with it. I mean, could it be the reproductive cycle or something particular to mammals that allow them to survive whatever traumatic changes happen?
Mammals were all small, they were warm-blooded, so were birds, they survived. So were a lot of small cold-blooded animals like lizards, frogs, salamanders. It's very difficult to find. You've got to find an explanation that covers all of those things.
Are the whales fairly recent then?
The earliest whales go back about 45 to 50 million years.
When did fur start?
When did fur start?
The rodeo, for instance, is pretty old. Living in a cold climate.
Well, we've got evidence that a totally different group of reptiles to the ones I've been talking about today gave rise to mammals. And the earliest indication of whisker pits, and because whiskers are hairs, you find them in the snouts of these animals that go back about 250 million years. But that's a wholly separate line of evolution, which you can trace back to one big divide. One group of early reptiles went one way, and gradually the group that actually the evolutionary trends led towards mammals. The other group led towards all the reptiles we know today and birds.
We've got time for just one more question, if we can, please.
I can understand vaguely that all the climatic change and the volcanoes and the meteorites and the continental bit would have accounted, and particularly it seems to make sense for the large land animals, which you can imagine would be more vulnerable. But I understand that there were large dinosaurs creatures in the sea, and I would have thought that that was a more stable environment, and yet they seem to have died out as well.
Well, can I just put you all right on one small point? There were no dinosaurs in the sea.
Is it just a different name?
Well, yeah, but there were large marine reptiles living in the sea right through to the end of the Cretaceous. They were absolutely nothing to do with dinosaurs.
Okay,
right? But yes, they were there. There does seem to be, whether connected or not, there were certainly some drastic events went on in the world's oceans. And there was certainly a food chain crash in the seas, which may have, almost certainly was the reason why they died out. But again, a lot of them were living in quite coastal areas, particularly the long-necked plesiosaurs that were alive then, and a group of marine lizards called mosasaurs. They do seem to have been coastal, living in coastal shallow waters, so the same, but the sea levels changed, and there were far less coastal margins.
Yes.
And there are now, may also have been part of that.
Yes.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. I hope before you go you'll take a moment to look at the marvellous artwork of John Civics at the back of the hall and to take a look at some of the wonderful fossils that Dr. Milner's brought with her today. It's been a special day in Cuckfield's history, and I'd like to thank Dr. Milner for coming all this way and giving us such an interesting talk. Thanks very much.
Millennium week, how grateful we are to Andy Ottaway, who has been instrumental in getting this dinosaur focus memorialized in Cuckfield, to Mike Howgate, who lectured this morning to over 40 children with 60 adults in tow. There are over 80 of you here this afternoon. It's quite obvious that dinosaurs are a fascinating area, and at long last we in Cuckfield have recognized our own preeminence in this field. Bravo, Cuckfield. And thank you very much indeed, Dr. Milner, for putting us so firmly and squarely where we belong, on the map. Finally, thank you all for paying for your tickets, despite which the mayor would like to have a few words.